In a sense, this episode is kind of full circle because as I was telling the guest off the air, who I'll introduce momentarily, the name of the show, and well, the audience knows this, is Mic'd in New Haven, which was inspired by the days in which I used to call WFAN, Joe and Evan, of course, Mike Francesa, as Mike in New Haven. Steve Summers I called as well, and Boomer and Carton. So back in the old days. So that is kind of what kickstarted this. And episode 1, all those years ago, back in 2017, when I started this thing, was Mike Francesa. And today, another current WFAN host. Mike's an alumni of FAN. This guy's still going strong since 2007. Just a quick note, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was volume 17 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, paying tribute to our late friend Miles' son, who was a guest of this program multiple times, was a retired inspector with the U.S. Customs Agency. We lost him to complications of a blood clot last year, so we were able to remember his wonderful life. Really, if you wrote a movie, people wouldn't believe it. The guy did a lot, so it was nice to pay tribute to him. Like I said, won't keep my guests waiting long. I'm really excited about this one. We'll just do our ad real quick, and that is, of course, retired NYPD Detective Billy Ryan of the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD Detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Proud supporter indeed. Love my friend Billy. All right, my next guest is a man who has worn many hats over the course of a career that's taken him from the gridiron to the broadcast booth to the radio. A native Long Islander, which we'll talk about, spent 13 seasons in the NFL, the highlight of his career being winning the MVP as quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals in the 1988 season, rather. Also took the Cincinnati Bengals to a Super Bowl. Since his playing days concluded in 1997, he took to the booth, briefly serving as a color analyst for Monday Night Football on ABC and broadcasting a record 19 consecutive Super Bowls for Westwood One Radio. He didn't have an easy task in 2007, succeeding a legend in Don Imus, but he's done well with it, and he's still on the air at WFAN Sports Radio 66 in New York City as host of first Boomer and Carton from 2007 to 2017, and since 2017, Boomer and Gio, which airs on FAN and is simulcast daily on the CBS Sports Network on television, and that, of course, is Mr. Boomer Esiason, who we welcome now to the Mike the New Haven podcast. Boomer, nice to reunite with you. Like I said, I used to call you.
You know, I recognize the voice, and now I know who Mike in New Haven is, and I love the poster behind your head. So, you know, you're thinking my way, and I know you love the Rangers just like I do. So I'm more than happy to be here with you this morning, Mike.
Oh, thank you very much for making the time. Like I said, I know you're a busy guy. So you're an East Islip guy. Take me through growing up on Long Island and growing up with the father who worked hard and seemingly instilled the same work ethic in you.
Yeah, well, my dad was a World War II vet. He spent 16 months in theater in Europe during World War II. Wow. And probably some of the worst things that he saw were at the end of World War II, the revenge killings of some of the things that, you know, he would bring back home with him. And he very rarely ever talked about it. And, you know, I had two older sisters. He bought a house in 1959 for $17,000 right on the outskirts of Heckscher Park in East Islip. My two older sisters were 8 and 9 years older than me. At the age of 7, the love of his life, my mom, Irene, unfortunately passed away from cancer. And, you know, I don't have many memories of her, but what I do remember most is my father basically sacrificing his entire life for me and my two sisters. And also his father, my grandfather, who ended up spending, I think, like the last 6 or 7 years living with us in East Islip. So it wasn't easy for him. Nothing was ever easy for him. Nothing that was ever given to him. He fought like an American soldier would fight in World War II. He was very much involved in a lot of the action. How he made it out to this day, he didn't know before he died in 99. And I remember my son Gunnar, who at the time was 8 years old, was asking him a million questions about World War II. And these were stories I had never heard before because he never shared much of it with me. But what I did see is I saw an undeniable work ethic, somebody that to his core had high ethics, had a lot of friends and a lot of respect. So if I could be half the man he was, I always said about myself, then I would consider myself a success.
And he, as a working man, I believe he had a 3-hour commute into the city in addition to raising a family.
Yeah, it's crazy. We lived in East Islip, so he would take, I think, the Babylon Line train, the Long Island Railroad. He would go into Lower Manhattan. He worked for a company called Continental Insurance. He was a insurance inspector. He was an engineer by trade, and he would inspect buildings that were being built at the time. And I think he was a part of the OSHA files. That was the Occupational Safety and Health Acts that came out of the 70s, I believe. I think he was part of that when he was working for Continental Insurance. And I'll never forget one of the projects that he was working on, and this is where my love of the Rangers and the Knicks came from, was Madison Square Garden as we know it today. So in 1968, that building opened, and his company was fortunate enough to have some tickets, and we would go back into the city and go watch Ranger and Knick games, maybe about 4 or 5 a year. And that's when I fell first in love with Rod Gilbert and the game of hockey. But unfortunately, we couldn't afford it, and hockey wasn't nearly what football, baseball, and basketball were when I was growing up in East Islip.
So tell me, I guess in line with that, we're talking with Boomer Esiason here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. If you have a question in the chat, fire away, of course. Tell me where the interest in athletics be. I mean, from watching it is one thing, but the desire to play it yourself, where did that start?
It came from him. I remember as a young man, I mean, really young, as a young kid, I should say, 4 or 5 years old, he'd be pitching to me. I'd be hitting. I'd be pitching back to him. We would throw the football around. I remember one of my first Christmas gifts, and I think was probably somewhere when I was around 4 or 5, was a plastic wiffle ball football. And I could whip that thing all over the backyard. So my dad knew that I could throw. He knew that I could hit. And, back then there was no baseball or football or flag football until you turn 9 years of age. And that's when Little League started. And I do remember the first Little League tryout that I had, and this is where they draft the new players coming into the league. And I just killed it. I was hitting the ball all over the gymnasium at East Islip High School. And next thing I know, I was the first pick in the, I guess it would probably be the 1970 Little League draft of the Islips for the Indians of all teams. So that's where it all started for me. And my love of baseball, basketball, and football was definitely driven by my close relationship with my dad.
Of course, you ended up playing in the NFL, but was there a desire before the NFL to ultimately be a major leaguer in baseball or basketball, or did you always have your sights set, particularly on football?
I really had no idea. I mean, I was good at all 3 sports. I was great in baseball, I will say that. And I played the most important position in football. I had a great high school football and baseball coach. They were the same man. His name was Sal Champy, who was like a second father to me. And this is back in the days in the 70s where, dad supported the coaches. They weren't screaming and yelling at the coaches. And everybody admired Sal. Sal was a football star himself at Lawrence High School, then got a scholarship to Purdue and was the captain of the Purdue Boilermaker team. And his quarterback was Bob Greasy. So Sal brought a lot of what he learned at Purdue back to East Islip and created a really cool environment for young men, and especially young men that, whose dads were World War II vets, or some guys didn't have dads. Some people came from broken homes, and he was like our second father. And all the dads in East Islip back in the day all supported the coach. They all loved him because he was tough on us. And that's what dads really want. They want a toughness that is going to be bestowed upon you. And if I didn't have Sal in my life, there's no way that I would have ever gotten to where I had gotten to. But for me, I thought I was going to be a baseball player. I thought I was going to go to St. John's and I was going to pitch on the same staff as Frank Viola and John Franco. But instead, Maryland got in the way, and they offered me a scholarship to go play football, the only scholarship offer that I got. And for some reason, I decided to take that. I don't even know what I was signing back then. In 1970, I think it was 1979, I'd signed a letter of intent, not even knowing what it was. And then my high school coach called my dad at home. I said, "Your son just got a scholarship to the University of Maryland to go play football." And I thought that was pretty cool and great until I got there and I was 11th string on the depth chart.
Nevertheless, getting there, though, you had Jerry Claiborne and Bobby Ross as your head coaches. So, I mean, listen, even if you don't play a lot, eventually, I'm sure you did. It's the lessons from these coaches that shape you not only as a player, but as you were talking about with Sal, shape you as a man. When you look back at Jerry and Bobby in particular, especially with what would come later, what are the best lessons you feel you learned from those guys?
Well, Jerry was a Southern Baptist. He never cussed. But he was demanding. And he ran an antiquated offense for us. And the offense that we ran, we'd have to pitch it to the halfback and lead around the corner as one of the lead blockers with the fullback. And back in those days in the ACC, Lawrence Taylor was out there, the Perry brothers at Clemson. I mean, what are we, nuts? So they treated quarterbacks like they would treat a linebacker. And, I was kind of in a bubble in high school because I think my coach was afraid that I would get hurt. And then what would happen to the team? I mean, we had a really good team. We were a championship team. So he always kind of protected me. Don't run with the ball. We're only going to throw the ball about 10 times. So it was really interesting that Maryland actually wanted me to come there and play quarterback. And then when I got there, I understood why. Because they thought that I was big enough and I was strong enough to be able to handle the offense that we were running. And it took 2 years, well, actually 3 years, until I actually got on the field. And I almost got kicked out of school. And, there's so many stories that, young Boomer was very rambunctious, to say the least, and was a big pain in the ass to most people around him. So as I speak of myself in the third person, I realize that, you gotta, if you really want to become successful at something, you got to really desire it, you got to love it, and you got to really want it bad enough to sacrifice everything in your life. And thankfully for me, I was able to replace a couple guys, and my initial success showed that I could play. And then, of course, Bobby Ross comes in my last 2 years and brings a pro-style offense. And now, finally, I get to show my arm strength that I had when I was a pitcher in baseball. And my career took off my last 2 years under Ralph Friedgen as an offensive coordinator, Bobby Ross as the head coach, and Joe Krivak as our quarterback coach. You couldn't ask for more experienced people to teach you how to play the game of quarterback at that level with that kind of passing attack.
And it segues, of course, into getting into the NFL. Now, of course, it's a major step forward, obviously. And this is something that no matter the sport that you desire when you're younger, a lot of people dream about, not a lot of people achieve. It doesn't matter how long you play for, just to get there is an accomplishment in and of itself. So being in the draft, and ultimately when Cincinnati called your name, take me through, especially with how you described your childhood earlier and growing up with your father, and of course, losing your mother at an early age. Take me through what your emotions were in that moment for such an accomplishment like that.
Yeah, I was really disappointed in my draft day. I thought I was going to be a top 5 pick, but all of us players think that we're going to be top 5 picks, or we should be top 5 picks. And so do our family members and the people around us. And my story on draft day was very disappointing. Mel Kiper has made a living off of my name, which is fine because he was defending me like he was defending Shedeur Sanders this year. And every time that he gets into a position where he's defending a quarterback, they go back to the 1984 draft, and there he is saying, how come nobody's taking Boomer Esiason? What's wrong with this league? They don't know what they're doing. Well, there were a lot of things that were going on back then. The USFL was in place. They were stealing quarterbacks like Jim Kelly and Steve Young. I think people thought maybe the Generals, who were owned by Donald Trump, were going to come after me, but they ended up ultimately going after Herschel Walker and I think Doug Flutie. So I didn't fit in their plans. And I even held a press conference saying, I don't want to go to the USFL. I'm not rooting for the Memphis Showboats my entire life. I was actually a Burt Jones fan. I love the Baltimore Colts because of Burt Jones and the way he played. And that's how I tried to model myself as a quarterback. So my agent at the time was not very happy. And that agent was named David Falk. And David Falk went on to become the agent of Michael Jordan and Patrick Ewing and Allen Iverson and Dominique Wilkins and all these great basketball players. And me and James Lofton were, I think, his 2 football clients. And I'll never forget, he said to me, he goes, Boomer, you just took away all your leverage. I said, but I want to play in the NFL, David. You don't understand. You're a lawyer, you're an agent, you love athletes. I love athletes. My dream is to play in the NFL at this point. So I'm going out there telling everybody, forget me in the USFL. I do not want to play for any of these teams. And maybe that hurt me a little bit. I don't know, but I dropped to the second round. Sam Weish called me. And Sam Weish, by the way, was the only head coach in the NFL that I spent time with personally. And it was at my high school on a blustery March day where he and I were out there playing catch. And I remember I was throwing the ball so hard that I actually ripped his hand open. And he goes, well, you certainly have the arm strength, that's for sure. And then when he called me, he said, hey, Boomer, how would you like to be a Cincinnati Bengal? I said, I thought you lost my number. And so it turned out that I ended up in Cincinnati, which it really was the best thing for me because they had Kenny Anderson and Turk Schonert as their quarterbacks, and Kenny's career was winding down. And Sam was a rookie head coach who had come from working with Bill Walsh out in San Francisco with Joe Montana. So I was plucked out of the second round and put right into Cincinnati, and it worked out well with those three men kind of nursing me along my first year until I took over my second year.
Your debut ultimately came against the Houston Oilers at the time. So again, a lot of
Houston Oilers, Jerry Glanville. Oh my God, he was all about killing the quarterback. I mean, I pooped in my pants before the game. I was so nervous, and I had no idea what I was getting into. And back in those days, we had just a brutal rivalry with the Houston Oilers. They had Warren Moon, of course. We had Kenny Anderson at the time, but then I finally took over the next year. But that first game, I'm telling you, Mike, I had no idea what I was doing. This is why when I talk about young quarterbacks now, I walked a mile in their shoes. So I know what they're dealing with, and I know the expectations. Thank God I didn't have social media rattling around in my head when I was failing, because we won the game, but I didn't do anything spectacular that game. They were trying to just win the game with defense and a running game, and every now and then asked me to throw a pass or run with the ball somehow. And I got through it, but I swear to God to you, I had no idea what I was getting myself into and how hard it was going to be.
I will go back for a second. A New Yorker, grew up on Long Island, to go to Ohio, being in the Midwest. Eventually got used to it. You spent 8 years of your 13-year career out there, and you had 2 stints, not just one with Cincinnati. But was there a little bit of culture shock at first?
Yeah, and yes. As a matter of fact, they did not have Boar's Head, so I had to make sure that the local deli outside of where I was living ordered Boar's Head into Cincinnati, and not knowing at the time that Cincinnati was known as Porkopolis. It had a lot of meat branding companies there and manufacturing companies, and the last thing they wanted is the quarterback of the Bengals talking about Boar's Head in Cincinnati, Ohio. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call, but to this day, I'm very proud to say that I feel like I brought Boar's Head to the Midwest, because now everybody carries it in Cincinnati, of course. So it was a little bit of a culture shock. It's a great city. It's a small Midwestern city. It's a lot like Pittsburgh. It's Cleveland. It's Detroit. It's Minneapolis. They're all very, very similar. Great places to live. Great people. Great fans. And when you're winning, and we were winning from 85 to 92, the Bengal fan was just awesome to play in front of.
And of course, there was that run to the Super Bowl around 87, 88. And just again, you have the city behind you. There's a fever to it. And this is a time when the Reds were pretty good. Barry Larkin was starting to come around at this time. Eric Davis was going good at this time before the injuries got him. Paul O'Neill, who, of course, came to New York like you did eventually, was there as well. But nevertheless, it was a football town for a little while.
It was. Well, Ohio is a football state. It's like Texas, it's Florida, it's California. I know a lot of great basketball players and, baseball players come out of all these states. But Ohio, it's the birthplace of football. You got Canton, Ohio there. You got the Hall of Fame there. The Cleveland Browns, who were one of the most successful franchises in the 50s and 60s under Paul Brown, who ultimately ended up getting fired by Art Modell from the Browns and then founded the Bengals in 1969. So there was a branded rivalry between us and Cleveland, us and Pittsburgh. The whole region really is a football region first and foremost. But yeah, I do remember that. What people forget is in 1987, we were on the NFL player strike. And the strike took place after week 2 of the 1987 season. That summer of 87, I signed my second contract. And lo and behold, the Bengals gave me the largest contract in NFL history at that time. It was 5 years, $6 million. So I was making $1.2 million, $75,000 a game. And lo and behold, I was also the NFLPA player rep for the Bengals. So I think what they were trying to do is recognize how good I was playing for them in 85 and 86, and it was time to do a deal, which was great. But I think they are also trying to temper my intensity for the union and fighting for the players. And maybe if they had the highest paid player who was a union rep, maybe that guy would go in there and try to talk players out of striking and all that other stuff. But the reverse happened. It became even more intense, and I became even more intense to the point where once the 87 season finally was ended, and we were 4-11 that year, because the team only played 15 games, and that's where the three games that were played by the replacement players, it got really ugly in Cincinnati. It got really intense between me and the head coach, me and the ownership, and they couldn't buy me off. And I wanted to stand up for the players. And to this day, I still feel like I did all the right things, even though some of it was a little wacky. I sat down in front of a bus, and there was a picture on the front page of the Cincinnati Enquirer. You would think this was 1969 and we were, protesting the Vietnam War or something. That was the feeling around it. And it was intense for us players, but I wanted my players, our players, to know that I'm fighting for them. And that's what led to really, because 87 was our best team on paper. But that's really what led to the 88 success, I believe. We were really close. And our head coach, for some reason, thought that there was a racial schism on our team when there wasn't. So when we came back to the 88 season and we went to training camp at Wilmington, Ohio, he would room black and white player, offensive and defensive player. And I'm like, I don't know why you're doing this. I mean, our team is as close as any team I've ever been on. And I saw it through the strike, how we all fought through it together. There might have been 4 or 5 guys that crossed the picket line at the time. Then that was intense. But that's what fueled the success that we had in 1988, I believe.
No, of course, because I'm about to say, I mean, it would have been easy and it's funny to look at that contract compared to the contracts we see across all sports now. Back then, that's talk about a bargain. But nevertheless, at that time, it would have been easy, as you said, being the highest paid player, to calm down. Most guys in your shoes would have calmed down and said, okay, well, I got mine. It wasn't about just getting yours. Like you said, it was about doing the right thing. And when guys saw that, they galvanized around you.
Well, it's the bigger picture of the argument. And
right.
I don't necessarily know the NFLPA did us any justice at the time. And I still reflect back on those days. And I think it's failed leadership without question. You can't say that when you look at the players today and how they're doing. But, we're talking 40 years ago. So, I mean, or 38 years ago to be specific. So I don't regret any of that stuff. And I just think, coming out of the 87 season, if we would have had social media, the Bengal fan would have ran me out of town, because I was, the example of a high-priced athlete who wanted more. And so I was boxed in politically for sure. And I knew that at the time. And I remember telling my teammates, I said, guys, if I'm going to go out there and fight for your guys, I need your unbridled support. And most of them, if not all of them, gave it to me, because they knew that I was the highest paid player. I was losing the most. And I even lent some money to a few of my teammates who were in really dire straits, because they needed their paychecks at that time, because they weren't making that much money. So I was a public enemy number 1 in Cincinnati for sure, Mike, in 87. And then in 88, we got off to a great start. I think we won our first 7 games. And whatever happened the year before, this is why I always say winning cures everything, because I've lived it. And all of a sudden, Boomer is back. Boomer's here. Boomer's great again. And due in large part, I think, to the galvanizing of our team the year before.
And you did everything you could in that game. I know your arm was bothering you in that game. It was sore, but you pushed through it. You threw well. And ultimately, when I watched the not the Bengals and the Bills, the Chiefs and the Bills a couple of years ago, and the 13 seconds for Mahomes, I thought back to you, because you did everything right. You put him in a position to win. Any other quarterback with that little time left wouldn't have been able to go down the field. But then there's Joe Montana. So nevertheless, for as heartbreaking as it was, getting there is an accomplishment. Take me through that run. And even though it didn't end well, your fondest memories overall. Such a great season.
Well, my fondest memories were getting there and beating Buffalo in the AFC Championship game. And I remember running off the field in the arms of my backup quarterback at that time. His name was Mike Norseth. I think Turk was on that team as well. So we had 3 quarterbacks. We had a great quarterback room. And we were all really, really close with one another. And just coming out of 87 to actually turning it around to where now we're going to the Super Bowl was remarkable. And how my life had changed significantly at that time. And I didn't have any kids. I was living life free and carefree, I should say. Everything was great. I got married the year before. It was just a great, great time in my life. And to have my dad be a part of it, to have my high school coach to be a part of it, my sisters to be a part of it, that's the part that nobody sees, the behind the scenes stuff of all the people that have been in your life to get you to where you are. I mean, you have to make it on your own. There's no question about that. But there are going to be those down days where those people that you love the most are going to be right there helping you along the way. And that's the greatest part about making it to the Super Bowl. I only did it once. You think you're going to do it like multiple times, and then you realize as your career goes on, there are a lot of decisions that are made that are out of your control that unfortunately adversely affect either the team or you individually. And then you realize that, this is a bitch, man. This is really hard to do. And I that's why I have so much respect for like what Tom Brady did with the Patriots. I mean, and so much respect for what Troy Aikman did with the Cowboys and Terry Bradshaw did with the Steelers. I mean, people don't realize how many things have got to go right for you. I could say the same thing about Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, John Harbaugh. I think about how much he and Lamar Jackson have won together, or Coach McDermott and Josh Allen. They have won, but they just have not gotten to the Super Bowl. And that's how hard it really is that those superstar coaches and superstar players have never been there.
Right. No, it's not an easy, and even to a lesser extent, Ben Roethlisberger with the Steelers, who was able to win a couple championships in his own right. He got to 3 Super Bowls overall. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, I think of Aaron Rodgers, right? One of the greatest quarterbacks to ever pick up a football, only got to 1 Super Bowl, only won 1. And hey, listen, he got 1, but nevertheless, that was 2010. He hasn't been back since. And think about the amount of winning he's done in his career.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, but that's what makes it so sweet when you win. Because now they have to play 17 regular season games. If you're a wild card team like the Giants were back in 2007, and
2011,
right? And you go all the way, and you beat an undefeated Patriot team in 2007. I think back because that was the first year that I started with Craig Carton on WFAN, and I remember vividly how Giant fans were disgusted halfway through the season with both Tom Coughlin and Eli Manning. People have selective memory. And I remember this is the first year I started. I'm like, I'm defending Eli Manning on the radio. And I think this is either his second or third year.
Yeah.
And people had enough already. I'm like, I think if his career would have started today and it started out the way that it did, I don't necessarily know that he would have made it to the Super Bowl year. And I just remember how just fans, they want winners. And it doesn't matter if you're a good person, a bad person, just give me a winner. I want to show up and I want to see my team win. That's how much pride I have in that uniform. And the fact that they both made it to that point and were able to turn their season around and upend Bill Belichick and the undefeated Patriots is probably the single greatest upset run that I've ever seen as an adult athlete fan. As a kid fan, I don't ever remember anything being so spectacular than that run there.
No, and I've gotten the chance to see both Giants Super Bowls and, of course, the Yankee World Series in 2009. That's my favorite championship of the bunch of the 3 that I've seen. That easily for exactly what you just mentioned, ranks number 1. And I'm going to get to your broadcasting career with FAN in a moment, but I'm going to segue back to 1997. You come home to New York as a Jet for a couple seasons. You play 1 season in Arizona. You go back to Cincinnati, finish things up in 97. The NFL is one of few jobs in the world where you retire and you still have to pick another job.
Yes.
So with that being said, tell me about getting the broadcasting bug and being able to eventually reinvent yourself after a successful 13-year career.
I had the broadcasting bug when I was in college. I had an emphasis in radio, television, and film at the University of Maryland. And for 2 years, I interned at WJZ TV in Baltimore, and I worked for Gail Gardner. She was a sports reporter, and Keith Mills was the producer at Channel 13 in Baltimore. Also on that staff there, but not as a sports reporter, just as an everyday reporter, was Oprah Winfrey. So I got to meet her when she was, that's how old I am, but that's I got to meet her there. And, she was just a reporter. She didn't ascend until probably 10 years later to greater heights than any of us could have ever imagined. But so I was in that industry when I was in Maryland, and as being the starting quarterback, I was always in front of the camera, always had a microphone in front of me because I would give a good quote. I wouldn't hide anything. I would say things. I would, obviously make people like Mike Wilbon, who he was the first guy that I covered for when he was working for the Washington Post at the University of Maryland. I made his job so easy. And I told him, look at you, you're a big star now, all because I taught you how to do this. And you were covering me when I was at the University of Maryland. So I'd always been around it. And even when I was playing in my playing days, I want to say 91 and 92 or 90 and 91, there was an entity called the World League of American Football, the WLAF, and they were backed by the NFL. And they signed a huge deal with the USA Network. And the USA Network, much like what happens today when a network that's not used to televising a particular sport, what do? They ask one of these other networks if they could use their behind the scenes equipment, the people, the producers, and the directors. So USA Football had Monday Night Football, and I was selected to be the analyst in the off season. And I worked with Brad Nessler and Michael Barkan from Philadelphia. And the producer and director that I worked with for 2 years on Monday Night Football on USA was Ken Wolf and Craig Janoff, who subsequently also, during the football season, were the producer and director for ABC Monday Night Football. So that's how I got to know those guys, and those guys got to know me and the way that I would broadcast. And in 1996, after I was done with the Cardinals, they asked me if I wanted the job then, and I said no. And I wanted to play one more year, and that's when I went back to Cincy. And then after my run in Cincinnati, the Bengals wanted me back. They wanted to give me a 2-year deal. And ABC came knocking one more time, and they said, do you want this job or not to replace Frank Gifford? And I said, what happens if I say no? Well, then we're going to go get somebody else, and you're never going to have an opportunity to do this again for ABC. And they were willing to give me an unprecedented 4-year contract. So I had a 2-year deal essentially pending with the Bengals, or a 4-year deal with ABC. And my kids now are born, and they are living in New York. And I have to make a decision. Do I stay in Cincinnati and stay with the Bengals for 2 more years? Or do I take the ABC job and retire and move back to New York? And obviously, you know the answer. I took the ABC job, and no regrets. I could have played another couple more years, but I think I made the right decision because ABC afforded me a much bigger platform to do what I was doing at the time, and that was trying to raise money for cystic fibrosis.
And we'll talk about that momentarily as well. But, I'll compare it to your debut against the Oilers. Now it's another debut, but in a different sense. Even though you weren't foreign to it, of course, we talked about where your itch for broadcasting began. The night you debuted in the booth, how similar were the nerves to when you debuted against the Oilers?
Well, the thing was I wasn't really that nervous, and it was we did the Hall of Fame game. So ABC had the Hall of Fame game and the Pro Bowl at the end of the year. So it was Al Michaels, Dan Dierdorf, and me, and we did the Hall of Fame game, and everything was really smooth. And I remember Al Michaels walking out of the booth screaming, "This is going to be Emmy winning. This is going to be Emmy winning," and it really seemed like it was great. And I got really close with Dan Dierdorf, the former offensive lineman for the Cardinals. And I love Dan. I love working with Dan. We would play golf. We'd go different places. We'd go out to dinner, on Sunday nights before the game, talking football. And then lo and behold, that year, which was the 1998 season, we were over in Hawaii getting ready to do the Pro Bowl. And it's announced that Dan Dierdorf is not coming back to the booth. I was shocked. And there were some back then. There were TV writers. They would follow along, and they would write different things, and things would be planted in newspapers. And somehow, some way, somebody reported that Dan Dierdorf and I were having problems. And I'm like, problems? I just got done playing golf with him and going out to dinner with him. And I'm like, where is all this coming from? Where is all this shrapnel coming from?
Right.
And I walked right into Michael Bornstein's office, who at the time was running ABC Sports, I believe. And I said, hey, Mike, I don't have a problem with Dan Dierdorf. If you're letting him go because you think we have problems, this is how stupid I am. There's no way that I have a problem with him. I love working with him. I think he knows the game just as good as anybody, and has really brought me along and helped me this year. And next thing I know, he was gone. And then the next year was me and Al in a 2-man booth. And there was a couple things that had happened during that year that I think eventually led to me being fired, and also the producer and director, Kenny Wolf and Craig Janoff, who I had met, back in 90 and 91. Well, I knew them because they did some of our games, but who I worked for at USA Network, they got fired too. The whole kit and caboodle got fired.
Right.
And I still to this day can't really wrap my head around it, but it's probably the best thing that ever happened to me personally, because it gave me a chance to work for Sean McManus and CBS for 22 years. And of course, Howie Deneroff and Westwood One, and Joel Hollander at Westwood One for, over 20 years. So it was, it was frustrating. It was humiliating. It was embarrassing. But at the end of the day, you got to pick yourself up and you got to go find something else. and I did, and it lasted pretty much half a lifetime.
Right. And that segues into Westwood One. And one thing I did want to ask you about, when you think of Kevin Harlan, naturally we think basketball. We just saw a man fly, amongst many other great calls that he's had over the years. But just as prolific as he is in covering the NBA on TNT, which he's done so well for a number of years, he's just as prolific in covering the NFL on the radio for CBS Sports. Working with him, especially with how prolonged the partnership that was, how did he bring out the best in you? And what do you enjoy about him, not just as a broadcaster, but as a person?
Westwood One was a great experience. So people say, do you like radio or TV better? I said, I love radio because you can expand your thoughts a little bit more than you can on TV.
Yes, you can.
I started with Howard David the first year. It was me, Howard David, and Matt Millen. It was great. We loved it. We did the Super Bowl, the Vinatieri Super Bowl against the Rams. That was me and Howard were in there doing that one. And then they hired Marv Albert. So I worked with Marv Albert for about 7 years at Westwood One. He was awesome because he was a childhood idol of mine. Right. And, so I was like, here I am working with the guy who's the voice of the Knicks and the Rangers, for God's sake. This is the greatest thing ever. And then when Marv stepped down and they put Kevin Harlan in there, I mean, the energy level just went through the roof. All the guys that I've worked with, every single one of them, including Al Michaels, all extremely prepared, all have a way with words, all had a flair about what they do. They all know the rules. They are amazing people to be able to do what they do, know all the names, know all the numbers, know all the storylines, know when to hit the storylines. And I would say that's Kevin's greatest asset is that, if the game is a bad game, and we had a lot of bad games on Monday Night Football at times, he would be able to segue into a whole nother conversation about something else that may be going on. And I often felt like when we had a bad game, it turned into sports talk radio or football talk radio, if you will. And Kevin's personality and friendship and his humble nature as a broadcaster, much like Marv Albert, too, for that matter, behind the scenes as an analyst, they restored my faith in broadcasting, to be honest with you, just like Howard David did. Like they wanted me, the analyst, to do the analyzing, to breaking down plays, and talk about maybe some history that I may have had to lend to the credibility of the discussion. And I would say that that's the thing that really made me love this business more than anything.
And it's an interesting evolution because that kind of segues perfectly into 2007 as well. You were not unfamiliar with WFAN. There's old recordings from the 90s that people have, Mike and the Mad Dog and Imus in the Morning, where particularly with Imus in the Morning, you were a regular on Imus. You knew him very well. It was the show for a while. The thing with Imus in the Morning that you have to understand, and I love that guy and I miss him, and I wish I would have gotten him on the show, was did he ever have as big an audience listener-wise as Howard Stern did? No. And even Imus himself would tell you that. But what Imus did have is he had Wall Street. He had Washington, which only enhanced once MSNBC started simulcasting the show in 1996. And that was what made him so good at what he did. He had the ear of, I guess, I don't want to say the upper class of society, because plenty of working people listened to him too. But he had a niche audience, and it worked for him, and it worked very well. 2007, we know the story. Unfortunately, controversial remarks got him canned. He came back on WABC, but a seismic hole in what had been a show that he had held down for almost 20 years opens up. And a lot of people thought he might be coming back in September of that year, but he didn't. And that brings you and Craig, two polar opposites. Craig Carton, of course, a veteran of WNEW back during the Opie and Anthony days, and you together. And it wasn't necessarily an orthodox partnership. It was quite unorthodox, to say the least. But God, did it end up working. So tell me about that whirlwind summer of 2007 leading into September and getting that job.
So I got to go back to 1993 when I got traded to the Jets. So in 93, 94, 95, Joel Hollander, who is then running WFAN along with, our program director, Mark Chernoff, come to me as the Jet quarterback and say, how would you like to do like a show with Mike and the Mad Dog? And we could do it every Friday at 5:00. And I said, sure, because there's another way to make money, right? So back then you're looking for more ways to make money and find sponsors and do different things. And really for me, it was about platforming and making sure that people could hear my story about CF. So I did a show with those guys, and it was must listen to radio. Those guys didn't hold back on me when I played poorly. Those guys didn't hold back on us when our team was terrible. We went through 3 coaches in 3 years, Bruce Coslett, Pete Carroll, and then Richie Kotite. And those Fridays during the Richie Kotite year were just brutal. And like I said, I had a friendship with those two guys, but I also knew that they had a job to do and I could answer it and I can go back and forth with it. And I also had obviously a sense of humor. And that's how I got to know the WFAN group, was through my Jets initial show there. And then as years went on and I went to Westwood One, I did a Friday night in the Huddle show with Chris Mad Dog Russo at WFAN. So again, here I am. I'm being exposed to WFAN family and all that other stuff. And then along comes, I'm doing Westwood One, which, WFAN carried. And I would go on every Monday morning with Imus. And if I were ever in WFAN studios in the morning for whatever reason, doing line cuts or whatever it might be, I'd automatically become part of the Imus show. And, Imus was great. Don't get me wrong. He was a tremendous personality, really bright. But like I have found out over the years, if you don't have the right people around you, it's not going to work.
Right.
And, he had Bernard and Lou and he had Tracy in there. There's he had a bunch of people that were there.
Charles McCord.
Sid Rosenberg. Yeah, Charles McCord was great. And Sid was in there. And, even Sid is reborn now as a political talk show host. I think due in large part because he saw how popular Imus was, that he could make it work. So I was exposed to all of that. So when they came to me and they asked me whether or not I would be interested in morning radio, and it happened on the day that Imus was fired. I got a call legitimately 2 seconds after he was let go by CBS if I would have any interest in morning radio. And I said, if I would have interest if they're going to pay me as much as Imus, of course. And they said, well, I don't know if we can pay that much, but we can get pretty close to it. I said, okay, I'll consider it. And I know they were considering other people. And I had no idea who Craig Carton was. And then Chris Olivero and Mark Chernoff put me and Craig in a studio at WNEW on July 4th of 2007, said, here's some subject matter, go in there and talk about it. And literally after 3 subjects, Chris comes into the room and says, that's the show. That's the show I want. That's what I want for WFAN. I want it to be sports-based, but I want it to be funny. I want it to be controversial. And I want the athlete that's in there to have a good sense of humor and not take things too seriously. And I'll never forget, I really got nervous that I was going to do this because Craig had, reputation in the history. He had gotten himself embroiled in an argument with the New Jersey State Troopers. I had a friend who was a captain with the New Jersey State Troopers. And when she found out that I was, getting this job and I was going to work with this guy, you should have seen the flood of phone calls I was getting. Don't do it. Don't do it. Whatever. I said, I tried to broker a peace between the two of them. And I think I did that. But the one thing that I will say, and I love Craig to death, I really do. He taught me more about radio and broadcasting, especially a morning show, because a morning show is different than an afternoon or midday show. He taught me so much over the 10 years that we worked with that now working with Gio, and Gio too is so gifted and so talented that it's easy for me to sit there and just play off of everything that they're doing, or I can bring something myself and they know me so well that they can play off of that themselves. But Craig was a guy that I always say that he was an actor on the radio. Those 4 hours that we together, I wasn't working with Craig Carton. I was working with some actor that really, really, truly looked at it as a 4-hour stand-up. And if you were in his way or if he was going to insult you, he was going to go. And I just had to be the laugh track for most of it in the beginning of it because I didn't understand what he was doing. And then after about 6 or 7 weeks, I think I remember it kicked in. I'm working with this freaking stand-up comedian who is just trying to entertain everybody. And I got to go along with this. This is going to be awesome. And it turned out to really be a great 10-year run. And he was great to work with. Never late for a show, always on time, always would want to do things around the show, want to promote the show. And then when we got on TV with MSG, all hell broke loose. So, which was great.
Because I was going to say, lest we forget, that first year wasn't easy. Again, it's hard. You were replacing a legend. And it took a while. There, was a little bit of resistance, as Craig wrote about in his book at the time, too, from certain personalities at the station. But about
Mike
a year.
And Chris. It was Mike and Chris.
Yeah.
They thought they ran a station. And I can understand that. They were really close with Imus. They probably, didn't want to see him go. And why would they? I mean, he was a cash cow, as you were just saying. And I'll never forget, I I had a friend who owned a Mercedes store. It's not Ray Katina. It was a guy that was up in Connecticut at the time.
Yeah.
And he was a huge Imus listener. And I introduced Imus to that guy. And that guy, next thing I know, he's like the lead sponsor on Imus's show. So I got the kind of the finances around a show like this. But, Mike and Chris didn't like Craig. I think they, for whatever, listen, it turned out I understand why they didn't. But, they made fun of us a couple times early on. And it felt, and I think Craig felt that it was mean-spirited. I probably did too. And I know we had a meeting with Mike once, and Mike walked in with sunglasses that Craig always talks about and wouldn't take the sunglasses off. And I'm like, all right, whatever. And then there was one where we were sitting on the couch and Mike wouldn't sit down. He was going to sit on the desk to be higher than us.
Yes, I recall that story.
I'm like, this whole thing is asinine. I mean, what are we doing here? We're all on the same team. I'm thinking from an athlete's perspective, a quarterback's perspective. Can't we all get along here? And Craig really was. I mean, he was the impetus to it, and he knew that the more friction there was, the better it was going to be for the station, I think, and the more fun he could have, and the more he could just basically let it go. And I'll never forget when we finally got our ratings and we hit number one. This was a major moment for us. And I think I want to say it was like after either our second quarter together or our third quarter together. So it was early on. We hit number one. And Craig, being the radio guy, says to Mark Chernoff, you now can no longer tell me what to say on the air. I am number one, or we are number one. And that's when he broke out the Susan Waldman, George Steinbrenner's box, Roger Clemens' George Steinbrenner's box. I was crying on the ground. I was laughing so hard because like Gio has like perfect impersonations. Like you
he does. He does a good Francesa.
He does. Craig just over embellishes everything.
Yeah.
And when he was doing Susan Waldman, I was crying. I mean, Al was crying, Eddie, we're all crying. We were laughing so hard. And that's when I truly knew that I'm going to love this show. I'm going to love this job, and I'm going to look forward to it every single day.
The day you guys made fun of Dog for, well, first Daredevil, there was that, but there was also Johann Sebastian Bach, which is on YouTube in its entirety. I was 10 years old listening to that at the time. I think it was during summer break, so I had time to listen to you guys. I wasn't in school then. And I was crying. I never forget. I was crying out. That's how hard I was laughing. It was great radio. And it depends on what era you're from. For certain guys listening to FAN, their era is Imus and Mike and the Mad Dog. But really, my era, I started listening to FAN when I was 6, 7 years old. Is really you and Craig, Joe and Evan in the middays, and then Mike by himself in the afternoons. And that was a great time, man. That was a great time.
It was a tumultuous time because Chris, Chris Russo left. It was weird. Was Mike going to have a partner, not going to have a partner? That was a whole thing for a couple months there. Me and Craig are trying to find our footing. I always felt like we were the Good Morning Vietnam Robin Williams radio program. And then came the show after us, which was Hardcore Sports. And I can still say that today. Sal and Brandon are really locked in on baseball and hardcore sports, where me and Gio are a little bit more free flowing and a little bit more lifestyle and a little bit more double entendre stuff. But I have to say, this morning we had a show, and I think I couldn't stop laughing for 5 minutes. And those are the shows that, you just never know when they're going to happen. And when they do happen, you realize, you know what, this is a pretty damn good job. It's a lot of fun. And it's all genuine. But I had those moments with Craig so many times, and I now have them with Gio just as many times. So it's just working with a different person, a different personality. A little bit younger than me. Craig was a little bit closer to me in age.
Yep.
And Craig loved playing that class you would have in school where you'd go past it and there'd be spitballs flying all over the place. And no kid would be in their seat, and the sports teacher or the substitute teacher would be sitting up in front of the class, couldn't control anybody. I always felt like Craig was one of those kids. He was the kid that nobody could control. And I did not want to control him. And there were times he would say things about people that I knew very good, and he would be very critical of, and I had to let him do it. And I never got mad at him. And he and I never had, and Gio and I have never had, a bad day in the studio. We've never left in the 10 years that we worked together before he left unexpectedly, never had a crossword to say to each other, never had a bad day. And I can say the same thing about me and Gio.
And before I get to your foundation, it's worth noting, not counting his time at WNBC before it became WFAN, Imus had the morning show on FAN for 19 years. This September will be 17 for you between working with Craig and working with Gio. When you think about that type of longevity and the success that's come with it, how would you define it if you had to define it in a sentence?
I would say that I look at it from a quarterback's perspective. I can't put it in a sentence, but I can put it this way. You know, I've been working with great teammates, great coaching. I've always tried to bring a certain level of stability to what I'm doing if I can. And I think I've been very lucky to have guys like Al Dukes, Eddie Scazzeri, and Jerry Recco. I mean, when Craig ultimately left and resigned, you know, I was presented with an opportunity to go to the afternoon, and most people think, you know, that's what you'd want because it gives you a much better lifestyle. And I remember sitting down with Al, Jerry, and Eddie, and all three of them going, no, we want to stay in the morning. You know, like they were whining to me about staying in the morning. And I legitimately thought about going to the afternoon, but then I was saying, you know what, 4 hours in the morning, having the way this thing is flowed out, if we could find the right guy, then I'll stay. And a lot of people at the station knew that it was going to be Gio. And I knew Gio at least 10 years prior and know his history. And, I know what he was capable of. But now working with him these past 8 years, it was another genius decision by both Mark Chernoff and Chris Olivero to put him in Craig's seat.
And it was, and it's paid off in spades. Again, the ratings continue to be top notch, and the show, of course, continues to not only have success on the radio side, but as I mentioned, on the television side with CBS Sports Network. So that brings me into the Boomer Esiason Foundation, which also has two meanings, not just helping those with cystic fibrosis. I know that hit close to home with Gunnar, who's doing very well, thankfully. But after the tragedy of 9/11, of which the anniversary is next month, helping the families of 9/11. Originally, the office for Boomer, your foundation, was in the 101st floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And so many employees of Cantor Fitzgerald, which was closely associated with that foundation, perished that day. So since then, tell me about not only helping those with cystic fibrosis, but since 2001, helping the families of those lost on 9/11.
Well, lo and behold, I got traded to the Jets. Gunnar is 3 years old, about to turn 3, and he's diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. And, it was somewhat of a bittersweet moment for a number of people in the CF community because they really didn't have anybody, that was a celebrity, if you will. They had Frank DeFord, who lost his daughter, Alex, at the age of 8 at that time. They did a movie. He wrote a beautiful book about her, and he really was the celebrity spokesperson, but he was a writer. He was, he had TV presence, but he wasn't a football player. He wasn't a quarterback. And he was kind of like my mentor because I got involved in CF well before Gunnar was even born, because I heard him speak where I was getting an award, and he spoke about how he lost his daughter, Alex, to CF. So I went up to him and said, if I can help in any way. He goes, oh, I'd love you to help. You could be a celebrity at a celebrity waiters luncheon in Cincinnati, be a part of a golf tournament. I'll bring out the celebrity ski, all this different stuff. So I got involved without having children, because I wanted something else in my life. I wanted to be a part of something that maybe, and quite frankly, going to Cincinnati Children's Hospital back in the day, seeing CF patients was no fun because a lot of those patients were really, really sick, either needing double lung transplants or dying before their 10th birthday. And I remember bringing roses to a girl who basically passed away before I got back to see her after a game that we, played on a Sunday. So I gave her roses on Friday. She was like 8 or 9. She was going in for a double lung transplant. Came back on Sunday after the game and got a call from the doctor that she didn't make it. Yeah. So I knew the realities of cystic fibrosis. Gunnar's then born in 1991. I get traded to the Jets in 93. And right as I get to the Jets, he is diagnosed with CF. And the most weird thing overtook me. Like I didn't know how to act. And I remember telling both Gunnar's mom, my dad, and everybody in my life, maybe I should retire. Maybe I need to do, something else now. And maybe football's not in the offing. And I don't want to let down Bruce Coslett, who was my offense coordinator in Cincinnati, who is now the Jet head coach, who just made the trade for me. And then I got a call from Frank DeFord, and he said, look, this all we could think is this is a sign that You're going to go to the biggest media capital in the world. We don't have anybody that would have the platform that you have. I don't have the platform that you're going to have. And that's when we launched our foundation in 1993. And, it's been a whirlwind, to say the least. And, and to tie it into 2001, my friend Howard Lutnick, who is our commerce secretary now, was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. He allowed me floor space within Cantor Fitzgerald for nothing. He supported our foundation financially himself and through his company. I had about 150 friends that worked at Cantor Fitzgerald and supporters, including my best friend, Tim O'Brien. And that fateful day, I was actually out in Denver coming back from a Monday night game that I was doing on Westwood One. It was the Giants and the Denver Broncos, the McCaffrey game where he broke his leg.
Yeah.
And obviously, our plane was not allowed to take off. We got off the plane, go into the tarmac, terminal, I should say, and look up, and there I see the North Tower on fire, right where my offices are, right where Cantor Fitzgerald's offices are. And you could just imagine what I'm thinking about. I hope they didn't go to work, or maybe they didn't go to work. For Howard Lutnick, I don't know if he feels fortunate or not. I've talked to him about this quite a bit, but he was taking his child to his first day of kindergarten. So he missed, like normally he would be in the office like at 7:00 in the morning. So he missed that day, but much like the first responders, what did he do? He left where his kid was going to school and ran to the building. And as people were running out of the building, he was asking for floor numbers that they were on. Like he was going to see whether or not, is this entire company blown up or what's going on here? And I saw a man go through 5 years of living hell because he lost his brother, lost a lot of his friends, his best friend, Doug Gardner, had to keep the entire company, try to rebuild it, and try to work through London 24/7. And that's a guy who I admired. And I admired his work ethic and his never say die attitude. And that attitude has led me to where I am today. And fortunately enough for us in the cystic fibrosis world, we've raised enough money where we finally made a difference in 2018. And Gunner's likely age of 23 has now been expanded to 75 because of a drug development that took place, because of all the money that all of us in the CF community have raised together. And that's the greatest accomplishment of my life, is being a part of that team that was able to give life, a second life, to these kids with cystic fibrosis.
And that is a wonderful thing. I know it's been a passion project for you, to say the least, and especially, again, tying it into 2001 since then. And it's done so much good. And I'd be remiss, of course, if we didn't get the chance to talk about that here. In addition to everything that you've done on the field and on the radio, that's probably the thing you're most proudest of. And I can see why.
100%. When I held my grandson for the first time, his name is Casper. And then, of course, they had a second daughter. Her name is Mika. The fact that Gunner is a father himself, it's one of the things that I said way back when, that my hope in life and my goal in life would obviously be to win a Super Bowl. But if I can't win a Super Bowl, I want my son to outlive me and become a father himself, to feel the pride that, us dads have of our children. And, that dream has been met. It's been met because he himself has the same inner drive that his grandfather had. Like, he fought so many times going to the hospitals, getting PICC lines and having, all sorts of drugs pumped through him to try to keep him alive and to keep him off the transplant list. And that toughness, that desire to live, that desire to become the man he is today, is the thing that I am truly most proud of.
Very well said. Before we get to the rapid fire to conclude the program, and the hour's flown by, it's been a heck of a conversation with you. Quick prognosis, of course. Mm-hmm. Mets are in the stretch run. They're starting to play a little bit better. So we'll go through the three teams real quick. Quick prognosis on the Mets. What do you envision?
I do envision them making the playoffs. I don't think they're going to overtake the Phillies unless the Phillies have a few more injuries. The Zach Wheeler injury is huge for the Phillies, and it's huge for the Mets. But, it all is going to come down to health, I think. And the team is starting to hit now again. And I'm starting to feel some of the same vibes that we were feeling this time last year about this team. So I still think they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think their pitching staff is good enough. Their starting pitching staff is good enough to win a World Series, though.
As I said before, and producer Victor knows this, he's a Braves fan. I'm a diehard Yankee fan, but I'm not one of these elitist Yankee fans. I have nothing against the Mets. I
Why did
like
you
it
say
when both.
elitist? Why did you say elitist? Is there a subliminal message there to me or something?
No, not at all. I mean,
Uh,
listen, I'm the type of guy that loves to see both teams doing well. It's better for the city. The Yankees are starting to play better too, but I don't trust them because I've been hurt one too many times. You and I both share a love, however, although we differ on baseball, we're the same.
I will say this about the Yankees, though, Mike.
Yeah.
I think they're a 96, 97 win team. I do. And you look at the back end of their schedule, all you got to do is look at it.
Yeah.
And their performance against the Rays, hitting 9 home runs. I mean, they are an intimidating team. I don't care what anybody says. If you want, they got to get Max Fried going again. I don't know about
he struggled in the second half.
Right. I don't know about Carlos Rodon, but I'm telling you, if that pitching comes around, and I still think they're one of the best teams and have one of the best lineups in all of baseball. So I could see them at least making it to the American League Championship Series.
Hopefully. Although we differ on baseball, we're the same when it comes to hockey. We're the same when it comes to basketball. I'm not so bullish on the Rangers. What do you think?
I'm bullish, and I'll tell you why. I like the new coach. Love Mike Sullivan. Absolutely love him.
He is a winner.
He walks into the door with instant credibility. He's not going to be too hard on them, but there are expectations, and Chris Drury is feeling it. And I don't know if they're big game hunting, and maybe they're sitting on some contracts, waiting for Connor McDavid to make a decision, because I could see the Rangers going all in for him.
Yes.
Without question. So Panarin and he are both rising free agents. And I think Panarin's going to be on a mission to really put up big numbers this year. What we don't know is just how this defense is going to shake out. That was the shaky part of it last year. But Mike Sullivan is going to require everybody to play a 200-foot sheet of ice. And I do believe the combination of Vincent Trocheck and Miller are best friends, Pittsburgh guys through and through. I expect them to have great seasons this year. I really, really do. So Stanley Cup, I don't know, but I do think that they are definitely a playoff team.
Should they give anybody the C this year or wait another year?
I would give it to Miller. I would give it to him, or I would give it to Trocheck, who seemed to be, Miller didn't want to step on Trocheck's toes last year because he was traded for in the middle of the season. Trocheck was the one that was answering all the questions during the year, and I give Vinny a lot of credit for doing that. It was not easy. But I would say it's either Miller or Trocheck, for me anyway, that would have to be the captain.
And last one before the rapid fire that I'll mention. For me, I look at the Knicks now as people back then in 1993, 1994 did when Michael retired. Unfortunately, with Tatum going down, I hated to see that. He's a great player. Same thing with Halliburton. The conference is wide open. I know Cleveland's there. Orlando's going to be healthy, so there's threats there. But it's now or never. I think if there was ever a time for the Knicks to finally do what they haven't done since 1999 and at least get to a finals, it's this season. Do you agree?
Yeah, yes. They have 10 or 11 legitimate NBA players that Mike Brown is now going to play. Yeah. I don't know what happened. I was a huge Tom Thibodeau fan. I thought he brought stability, professionalism, defense to our franchise that has long been mismanaged. And they finally got it right. Leon Rose, I got to give him credit. Now, for some reason, they fired Tibbs. I'm not sure why. Now, Mike Brown comes in. He's got a great resume. I'm sure he's going to get along with these guys. And I think probably one of the things here, Mike, is because he'll play more players. And they got him more players. They got him more legitimate players. But the real question for me is going to be, okay, so whose minutes are we taking away? Are we taking away Mikal Bridges' minutes? Are we taking away Karl Anthony Towns' minutes? Are we taking away Jalen Brunson's minutes? I just want to know, because if we all want like a spread out roster and more guys playing, that means guys who put up big numbers, points, rebounds, assists, aren't going to play the same amount of minutes that they had been playing under Tibbs. And I just hope that doesn't turn into a complete and utter disaster. Like, I don't know if Hart goes back to the bench. I don't know if he's coming off the bench now. I mean, there's a lot of things that Mike Brown can play with here, but personalities are unique. And I think that's what's going to decide whether or not they actually make it to the championship, how unselfish they are.
Yeah. And they have that track record. Let's see if it carries over from Tibbs to Mike Brown. Of course, that brings us now into the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You could say pass if you want. First, top 5 favorite Rangers of all time.
Oh, Rod Gilbert, Mark Messier, Brian Leach, Mike Richter, Henrik Lundqvist, and 5A would be Chris Kreider.
Not a bad list at all. Second, top 5 favorite Mets of all time.
Wow. I have to go all the way back, man. Tom Seaver, number 1, without question, will always be in my heart. Love Cleon Jones. I'm Mike Piazza, of course.
Naturally.
I would say Jacob deGrom. Unfortunately, we don't have him now. I wish we did. And I love Buddy Harrelson.
All right. Not a bad list either. Third, you mentioned Super Bowl 42 earlier. Besides Super Bowl 42, favorite Super Bowl that as an analyst you've ever watched?
Or that I did. Okay. I would probably say Arizona and Pittsburgh down in, where was that? Was that Tampa? I think it was Tampa. That was the James Harrison pick, and that was Kurt Warner, Larry Fitzgerald on the Arizona. That was the Santonio Holmes catch in the back.
It's a great game.
I mean, that was an amazing game. And I did that game with Marv Albert, and I'll never forget when James Harrison catches the ball and he's running it back. And I'm looking at the clock. I'm going, he better score. There's going to be no time on the clock. And certainly he scores. So he kept them off the board, the Cardinals off the board, and he put his own team on the board. So one of the reasons why the Steelers were able to win that Super Bowl.
Of course, again, and we were spoiled there as fans of football in general for a couple years, because the year before, of course, was Giants-Patriots, a great game in its own right. And then, of course, you get an even greater game. And, of course, the Cardinals and the Steelers. Fourth question, the rapid fire, second to last. Funniest teammate you ever had?
Chris Collinsworth. I mean, he doesn't come off that way now on TV. I know that. I know he's more technical. He's very well spoken. But when I met him, he was 3 years into the NFL. I think he was Rookie of the Year. He was a couple-time All-Pro player already. And he was just a goofy, funny Florida kid that at the time wasn't married, didn't have any kids, and he was fly by the seat of your pants funny. And the one thing I remember about going to Cincinnati for the first time and walking into that offensive meeting room was just how smart the entire team was, from Anthony Munoz, Max Montoya. We had Isaac Curtis in there. Of course, Kenny Anderson, Turk Schoner, and Chris is in there as well. So everybody in there was just so smart and so funny. I would have to say Chris Collinsworth by far.
The last question, rapid fire. You talked about it earlier when you were a college kid. You can expand on it here. If you can go back in time, if time machines existed, and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what would the Boomer Esiason talking to me today tell the Boomer Esiason of then?
Listen, son, life comes at you fast, and you're going to have to deal with a lot of ups and downs. And how you deal with those ups and downs will ultimately depend on how successful you be. And I could say that there were times where I could have been better than I was because I was distracted by something that I shouldn't have been distracted by, or whatever the case may be. But I would just say life comes at you fast, and be ready for whatever it throws at you.
Good advice. Good way to end. Stick around. We'll talk off here. Before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything you want to give? The floor is yours.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much. I knew I recognized that voice when we met first on, and I'm glad you're still a big sports fan and certainly a big supporter of WFAN. I thank you very much for that.
Thank you for the time. It's been a long time coming to get you on the program. I know, like I said, I know you're busy, so I appreciate you making the time. Thanks to all of you in the audience, those of you who will listen to this, and of course, those of you who will watch it later. As always, I can't speak today. Producer Victor on the ones and twos. So this is a doubleheader coming up next in the Mike the New Haven podcast. We're not done. We're doing a second show later today. He came on the FDNY a month after 9/11 in October of 2001, has served for 23 years, going on 24 with the New York City Fire Department, currently a lieutenant with a podcast of his own, Top Floor Tactics. That's going to be Mickey Farrell tonight, live at 6 for what will be volume 71 of our FDNY miniseries, The Best, the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. For those of you listening on the audio side, when you hear this, from their 1982 album, Screaming for Vengeance, Judas Priest comes your way with You've Got Another Thing Coming. In the meantime, on behalf of producer Victor and Boomer Esiason, I'm Mike Colón, a.k.a. Mike in New Haven. And we will see you later today for the second show of the doubleheader. Take care.